Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My guest today is Eric from Gun Gamers. Eric is a friend of the show, but it's been a hot minute since we last had him on, and we were kind of catching up right before the show.
Too long, some could say.
Yeah, some definitely would be too long, so I'm super excited to catch up. Last time we spoke, Eric was sharing some of his vision for, what makes a good Airsoft event when it comes to game design, emergent gameplay, and I think we kind of just scratched the surface, and there's a lot more to talk about, and he's definitely gained a lot of experience when it comes to like running events and stuff since our last conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that if I'm not mistaken, Gun Gamers have a few events, new events coming up this year, and pretty soon I think that is the next one. So hopefully some of you listening will have the opportunity to check out some of these events, and that or this conversation encourages you to actually make the trip out. So Eric, man, welcome back.
Even better, host your own events as well.
Yeah, well,
we need an economy of dungeon masters, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and Eric wants to play, guys. Host a game for him. Come on, let's go. So, man, welcome back. It's certainly been a while. What have you been up to? Like, I know outside of like your day job and stuff. Like, what's Airsoft been like for you in the last year or so?
It's been very busy. It is very much like having a second full-time job at this point in a weird way, because on top of, hosting the Gun Gamers games, we hosted 4 last year, we're hosting 4 this year. And then, attending other people's games, working other people's games. I just went back to Desert Fox events again this year. I missed last year because I was ice climbing, which was also super sick. But
nice.
But there's it was super sick. But there's been a lot going on, and I've got more events that I'm going to be playing this year as well. Hopefully some local games. I'm trying to get out to Zulu 24 Airsoft more. Shout out to Zulu. They're one of my favorites. I love that place. But yeah, Airsoft has been busy. It's been a lot of different traveling to a lot of different events, and then also, traveling to host my events, constant rule set revisions, talking with players about, what they want to see, making tweaks and adjustments, prepping for upcoming games. So it's been very busy, sometimes a little too busy, but overall very, very good.
I know last time we spoke, I think you had it was just on the tails of one of Jet's last events, if I'm not mistaken. So you've been still cracking on with him, have you?
Yeah. I mean, I like working the format, to be honest. It's my big thing is I like going out there. I get along really well with a lot of the Milsim West crew who also help out with those. And it's just like, it's a very fun time to go out and get to interact with all the players. Like, more than anything else, I like working that format because I like working with all those players. I like getting out there to like help motivate people. I like the Corpo War lore and theme to it. I dressed like a mall cop this year. I was really going for the "sir, I can't let you in the building with an expired badge" vibe.
Nice. That's what the mustache is for, I guess, right?
Well, that, and I've got a Milsim West game coming up this weekend too, so I'm prepping for that with a mandatory red line item mustache. But
do you do Cadre for Milsim West as well, or is that one that you're going to be playing?
So I have done Cadre for Milsim West in the past. Obviously, Milsim West, like, one of their big aspects of their identity is it's a veterans organization, and for all I do in the world of Airsoft, I'm not a veteran,
right? So
I rank like on the as needed part-time scale of their Cadre hiring scale, but I do get to go to games for free, and I am actually being the platoon leader for this one.
Awesome.
So I'm in that like part-time Cadre slot.
Gotcha, like a grand Cadre, I guess. You just do the fun stuff for this one.
Yeah, honestly, it is like being the cool uncle. It's great.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Justin gets to be the mean platoon sergeant, and I just get to be like, yeah, you're doing great, guys.
Awesome. So one of the things, if I remember from, I think one of our last conversations, maybe not the last one, but the one before, Gun Gamers, your events are like, you have different themes to your events, generally speaking, right? So I think the last time we spoke, maybe you were talking about like a winter theme to one of your events, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we just had our winter game 2 months ago to the day now.
Okay.
Yeah, we do winter games, and that's one of the big things I like. You're talking about different themes. I feel like with a game, for me, like a lot of people build themes into their aesthetics, which
Mm-hmm.
is one way to build a theme. But I like building themes into my games with like the style of challenge that's being presented and the style of gameplay that can be expected. Like, our 12-hour games to me are ultimately are just like go hard 12 hours, shoot a lot of BBs, like move around a lot, not a lot of breaks. You're just going to go as nuts as you can for one day of play. And that's like the theme for those games. And then the way we introduce variation with those is the different venues and the different times a year. Because when you host a game in the winter, that carries a different level of challenge than a game in the summer or a game in the fall. Now, your guns might not work. You're going to have issues with sustaining yourself and keeping yourself warm, not getting too cold, not getting too warm, because I've seen people heat cas at winter games. It's
Mm-hmm.
crazy. And that's one of the big things I like to do with my games is I like to have a different theme that is aesthetic, because like we have our lore with our games and like the whole Gojiria versus Almirk thing, and people have gotten way more into that than I expected they would, to be honest. Um, but I like doing that aesthetic and also having like the gameplay feels that different as a result of these things.
Mm-hmm. And I know, like, for you as a Northeastern American, and like for me
Mhm.
as a very far Eastern Canadian,
Yeah.
we're very well accustomed to wintertime, right? And the challenges that that brings, just being outdoors and existing as a human, let
Mhm.
alone just playing. I'm curious, like, when you talk about those challenges and physical challenges, how has your player base sort of responded to those challenges? Also, how have you maybe adapted some of it to players who might travel, who might not be as familiar with the harshness of winter play?
So my big thing with it is a lot of it's going to be about like the amount of information you can give players ahead of time. For the first couple of winter games, we had like whole supplemental documents of like packing lists of everything you needed. Then we've also like put out videos on our channel about layering and about like sustaining yourself. So ultimately, I can't control the weather,
Hmm.
right? Like I don't have access to a weather machine as cool as it would be because I would make it snow year round. But but I do have access to information, and
Hmm.
I can front load as much as possible to players. We have our communications channels, like our emails. We have our Discord, we have our Facebook groups, and we can front load to players. Hey, here's the conditions we expect. Here's ways to prepare for it. Here's ways to some suggested equipment you can try out, some suggested systems. Here's what I've done that works for me. Here's what these guys have done. It is just communication and information at that point. And then we hand out hot hands at check-in. Like if anyone shows up and they just want hot hands, like, here you go. We have 6 cases of these in my garage. Get rid of them.
Yeah.
But that's the main thing is it's trying to provide people with as much information as possible so that they can be reasonably prepared, and trying to provide people with like the little bits of creature comforts. And one of our big focuses at the winter game especially is like accountability within the squads and the platoons, because we don't want anyone wandering off when it's 10 degrees and not being able to find their way. Like literally, as we were moving the game through the facility at the last one, I borrowed a thermal to go scan like where we were vacating to make sure that we didn't leave anyone behind.
Hmm.
So there is that legwork as a promoter where you're trying to do the safety stuff as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there are, for people who are listening who've never experienced the cold, like, it is very, like, it's dangerous. Like, you have to be very
Mhm.
careful. And like, for Canadians, I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn for you guys in the States, but for us, like, we do not take it for granted, and like, you have to have that respect. But at the same
Mhm.
time, you also kind of don't think about it. Like, when it's cold out, you know how to dress, and so you just do that. But
Yep.
what were some of the challenges? Because the other thing, you talk about player information, which is super important, but also players don't read stuff, right? So like, how do you sort of balance those two things, like, if for players who are not prepared, and like
Mhm.
understanding that, what, you're really potentially putting yourself at risk. Like, frostbite is a real thing, and if you're doing like
Yeah.
a 12-hour event or longer, right,
Yeah.
the risk is real in that context. Like, that is enough time for that to happen, right?
So that I've a couple of advantages on that, which I can't speak for everybody. Like number one, I'll be honest, my player base kind of self-selects because my rule set is long,
Mm-hmm.
and for all the memes about airsofters don't read the rules, generally speaking, players show up to my games cognizant of what the rules are. And if people are asking questions, it's because they read the rules and have a question about like the intention of the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think my player base in general, I've been very impressed with them. I have a lot of really great players, to be honest. But then, of course, there's the people who fall through the cracks, right? Like, of course, somebody's not going to read the rules. Somebody's not going to have received any of the admin emails because they signed up with a fake email or misspelled their name. Like, but that's where we have our staff who are on hand with the players, because again, I have that advantage of my games have 2 staff members attached to every 30 to 50 players. So literally for like every 20 players, I've got 2 staff out there or I've got 1 staff out there, and there's always somebody nearby where if there's a problem, we can help them troubleshoot it. And then we have that time before the game, where we brief and check in the players. And if people are missing stuff, again, I don't mean to brag on my community too much, but they're generally great. But someone will help them out. Like
Right.
I've seen people load out cold weather gear and guns and eye protection and whatever. Like it's a community, and people help each other. The cold is very dangerous. I don't want to like act like I don't respect it, but when you have a community of people to help you, it becomes easier to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. What was some of the challenges that your community had that they didn't expect from dealing with the cold?
Ooh, overheating.
Yeah.
Because I think people like they panic about how cold it's going to be,
Mm-hmm.
and they throw all their layers on, and then they start moving and they realize, oh my God, I'm too warm.
Yeah. Sweat is the killer. I remember
Yep.
Les Stroud, Survivor Man, talking about that all the time. If you start sweating, you're in the cold, right? You're in trouble. And you mentioned like heat casting. Is that something that you had to deal with this time around?
I did not have a heat cas at my winter game, thankfully. I had someone who had like an asthma issue, but I just went out in my truck and picked him up, and he was fine. Other than that, we had like a couple of people just get too cold, but mainly it was people's guns breaking, and they had no way to fight back, and they were like, all right, well, now I'm done. That was the main reason I saw people leave, to be honest, was either like they weren't that into the game, which like not every game is for every player.
Yeah.
I think we had like 1 or 2 people who were like that who left. Out of 256, I'll take that. But yeah. Right? Like,
Less than 1%. Yeah. Okay, let's go.
I'll take that. But then we had mostly people whose guns broke.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the things that you didn't expect as the organizer? Like, what were some of the challenges that you maybe had not foreseen? Ice. Okay.
So because we hosted at Skirmish, which is our latest winter game was at Skirmish Paintball, which is in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Also a great facility. If you're looking for somewhere to host in the Northeast, it's like one of the best. Because people are like, oh, this is a paintball field, no one wants to play there. But it's also like designed amazingly and plays super well. So definitely like look into Skirmish if you're looking to host in the Northeast. But there was a lot of ice, and I kind of wasn't expecting that. I was used to Zulu where like there might be patches of ice, but the terrain's pretty uneven. So generally speaking, it just kind of becomes like snow or mud. Whereas then at Skirmish, there were a lot of spots where there was a lot of ice everywhere. And it occurred to me, I was like, oh my God, we hadn't even thought about this because we hadn't hosted at a facility where that had been a problem. So we had some players show up with microspikes and crampons and other players not. And the main source of like sports injuries that I saw was people slipping on the ice.
Yeah. Yeah. Microspikes are definitely a clutch move for sure. But if you need to know that you're going to need them, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And I've done like hiking and whatnot outside.
Yeah.
But again, for some reason, like it totally slipped my mind. Like, oh yeah, Skirmish might get icy.
Yeah.
So those will be in the supplemental doc for next year.
Yeah. And it's not like they're super expensive, right? You can get them at Costco or wherever for like $20. And
oh yeah.
That's
if you want like a set you'll never replace, you can get the Cthulhu's for $60.
Yeah. Those are the ones that I have. Yeah. They'll last forever. So what was overall like? So obviously the you had lots of players stay, like your 99.9% or 99.5% of your player base stay. What was some of the feedback from the players themselves? Like, obviously, like I'm sure they had a great time, but like what was some of the things and comments that sort of helped shape your future events, or your thinking for future events?
So I will say, it was only the one or two that left because they were having a bad time
Mhm.
as I was counting. But we did have like probably, I don't know, I would say we had maybe 50 or 60 people leave,
Okay.
which for a winter game is pretty good.
You're still
We
like
were
200 players deep, right? So that's great.
yeah, we're over 2/3 like overall retention,
Hmm.
which is good. That's for a winter game, that's really good. But my main points of feedback that I heard were mainly related to like the game design, right? And to me, that's good. If all of the feedback is like, hey, there's these game design things that I think I would like to see adjusted, or I would like to see more of. That is perfect for me. Like I want that. I want that feedback. So my thought for future events, because the winter game was super violent. We went through like 300 or 400,000 BBs in the first like 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
which is
a lot for 200 players.
yeah. People were shooting a lot. It was awesome. But one of the main points of feedback I heard was that they wanted a little bit more patrolling to contact. Like the game felt like a company-sized slugging match for most of the game.
Mhm.
Like 128 versus 128, just duking it out, which is fun. But after 12 hours, it kind of feels very samey.
Yeah.
So I think what people want is they want the game to be a little bit more distinct in its phases, which was initially the intention. Like we had planned on each side inserts on kind of the opposite area and then like disperses to meet each other and then make their battle plans like further evolve from there. But what wound up happening was the facility moved a little differently than we expected. And as soon as they started dispersing into the field, it was immediate, just company on company. And there was no real way to like slow that down in a way that felt immersive. So like we're not going to do that. We're not going to be like, oh, well, you just have to take a rest phase while 200 feet that way, everyone's shooting their BB gun. Like that's silly.
Right. Yeah.
But I think spreading out the forces even more and then like having a more distinct patrolling phase to start, I think will help pace things out.
So what about like from the organization standpoint, and like, is this a facility that you plan on using again, like at different times of the year? Like how are you incorporating sort of that experience for your player base in future?
So for skirmish specifically, because like what I just talked about, we're doing at our next game, which is a different facility, the Landing, which is also in Pennsylvania. That's going to have the truly start on opposite sides. Whereas for skirmish, we've hosted skirmish 3 times now.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one was our first game ever, was Overture. That was in 2022. Last summer, we hosted our first role-playing game there, which was the Steel Underworld. That was great, but obviously played totally, totally different from a Force on Force. And then we did Snowblind, which was the most recent one. And I would say our lesson from those 3 occasions is that for a Force on Force game, the 2 halves of skirmish are really big, but they get smaller as you put more players on them. And in a Force on Force, everyone moves faster. So I think what we'll do next time is literally like not even start on opposite sides of one of the halves, but start on opposite sides of the facility and try to build more density into the different areas. So there's more reason to not concentrate on major spots.
Gotcha. So talking about your next event and your themes, like what is your theme for your next event?
So
if you can talk about it.
I can. Yeah, our next event is in like a little over 3 weeks now.
Okay.
It's Deadfall, and that event is our second run at the Landing, which is an old off-road park that's like family owned in Penn Run, Pennsylvania. And our theme for that one is kind of like, okay, Snowblind was this super violent winter game. That ultimately wound up being the theme, where it was just a brutal slugging match for 12 hours in the winter. This one, we're going to start with the patrolling phase, and we're going to try to have more reasons to patrol. My theme for it is that I want it to feel like Vietnam. Like,
okay,
you've got platoon and squad size elements moving separately because there's more different areas that need to be controlled, and then different things you get for controlling different areas. And my theme for it is that ultimately you're going to have like squad and platoon size groups doing a lot of movement through very dense terrain in order to just slug it out jungle style. So my theme for this one is like jungle warfare, and I want it to feel like guerrilla jungle warfare with a lot of movement and a lot of fighting in like really dense tight brush.
How much do you, when you're doing your game design, do you actually think about, or maybe you don't, like scripting movements? Because I remember, just to give some context, looking at the Volga flank, the Milsim Welsh Volga flank, like opwards, where it's very clearly explained in this opward, like, well, phase line 1 is here, phase line 2 is here, phase line 3 is here. You want to be at this phase line by this time, and so on and so forth. So in a way, well, it is scripted, right? Like those are your objectives, and so the game designers can talk to each other and create that experience, right? How much do you do that at your events versus give your leadership the opportunity to come up with their battle plans and so on?
It's a balance. What I generally do, I don't try to script the whole game. I try to script the setup and have a couple of scenarios for the finish. Like my idea for it is that there is the way that the game starts, there's the overall objectives everyone is fighting for, and then there's the overall like end point we kind of want to arrive at. My thought is that if you have those levels of intention in like the really important phases, then that gives the leaders something to plan off of. And that makes sure that everyone is on the same page. They're playing the same version of the game. So like my leaders do put out opwards, and like there is an overall intention and an overall plan for what each side is going to do. And that is like a level of scripting, but that is entirely based on here's what we're going to try to accomplish and what we're going to try to do based on what we predict prioritizing in what the design document is. And that's a lot of to be honest, a lot of my game design is just about giving the parameters to the commanders and then letting the commanders go nuts with what they want to do. And I find that as a game designer, giving that level of freedom to your leadership tends to be the way that they wind up the most invested.
And how do you like compartmentalize or think about when you look at a field that has like points of interest? So as an event organizer, you look at a field or a map or whatever, and you're like, okay, this place is cool, this place is cool, this place is cool or interesting, whatever. This would make for a really interesting engagement or a really interesting whatever. But that's not necessarily your endpoint. That's just something that you want to think would increase that experience for your players, right? Like, how do you balance that?
To be honest, the big thing is if you pick your commanders well, if you pick people that you can work with, if you pick people who look at the game a similar way to you, because I always tell all of my staff, like not just my commanders, but even down to the platoon level, you are a game master. Like the tactical part is one part of your job, but you are a game master. Like your job is to ensure that people are having fun and that the game remains interesting for everybody. So if they're looking at the game in that way, balancing their tactical brain and their game master brain, they probably see the same thing you see, or when you bring it up, they're also going to think about, oh yeah, that'd be cool. And then you can basically incorporate that set piece into the sandbox, because now it's not even a set piece really. Now it's just like, well, as a commander from the game master brain, like, okay, this is key terrain and I want to use it. From the tactical brain, here's how I'm going to attack it, or here's how I'm going to defend it. And that becomes, or here's how I'm going to interact with it, whether it's not like a key terrain, whether it's a prop or an NPC or something like that. You can do all kinds of different things with those. You just need everybody who's going to be implementing that to be looking at it in a similar way.
Has that always been sort of your perspective on this? Like, I'm curious how that point of view has developed, because it does involve, or it sounds like it involves, relinquishing some level of control.
It does.
Right?
It does.
So how have you developed that how has that developed for you over the last couple of years or several years of organizing events?
Well, so I started organizing games like really when I started playing Airsoft. I was in 2007, I was playing Airsoft in high school with my friends, and I would help like design the games. And one of the lessons I learned early on is that you can't game master and play at the same time. if you have a version of the game that you're trying to execute, odds are good you're not going to be able to execute it at the same time as you're playing it, because you are stuck on one side of an engagement unless you pull your red rag or, you know, put it on ab invest and then go to the other. You are always going to have to rely on other people to be playing the same version of the game as you. And, you know, that took a long time to fully mature into my modern perspective. And I think that just came from working a lot of events with a wide variety of people. Like, I, as the game master, can't be everywhere. I can't be doing everything. You know, I logged 37,000 steps at Snowblind, which was more than any player. Like, every player, no player has shown me a higher step count that they recorded. Like, people were posting up their step counts of like 20, 25,000. And I'm like,
Rookie numbers.
Yeah. But, and the reality is, like, I was doing all that and I still wasn't everywhere. Like, you physically cannot be everywhere. Hosting games, to a certain extent, is always going to rely on having people you can trust.
Yeah.
And if you can't trust people that you're having help you host this game, you're just doing it by yourself, then you have to be realistic about how much control you can even exert in the first place, because you can't be everywhere.
Yeah. How has sort of your approach to game design just in general evolved, I guess, in the last couple of years? Like, what are some of the things that have happened or that you've experienced that you're like, you know what, like, this is a change that I need to bring to the Gun Gamers games, or indeed just a change that you need to bring in your own mindset when it comes to running these events?
One thing I've kind of learned I have to do is I have to be less harsh on myself, especially when I'm around like players and other staff, because, you know, while I can't control everything, I can generally hear every problem. And that means that, like, things that I think of as problems or that I see that are problems might not have ever been a problem to 99.9% of everyone else out there. So if I let those problems weigh me down, or if I start complaining about those problems to people who never heard about them, then that's going to bring down their experience, or that's going to remind them that this is a production that, you know, is flawed. And it's, you know, I almost have to be able to let things go a little bit, because if I don't, then I'll get neurotic about it, and that'll bring down like the effort I can bring. They'll bring down the effort everyone else can bring. They'll bring down people's moods. And that's like the weirdest thing to do, when you feel like you want everything to go perfectly and then you worry about the problems, but sometimes you need to be able to move on from the problems.
Yeah, especially where it sounds like the feedback that you're getting from players by and large is phenomenal. Like, everyone is very thrilled, but it's easy as the event organizer who sees every problem to like hyper focus on all the stuff that didn't go the way that you either wanted or you expected or you planned for, right?
But also, I mean, but then there's the balance, right? Of, you can't hang on to every problem, but you need to be able to recognize what your action items are. And that's where my biggest like evolution as a game designer is letting go of some of that scripting in a lot of ways, because people see it. And when people see a lot of the script, because we used to do a little bit more scripting for our games. We used to do like, hey, here's like definitive phase lines that like we want to be set up this way. But then things either wouldn't go according to that plan. Things would kind of play out in a way where it didn't make sense in order to go according to that plan, or like things would grind up in a place that we didn't predict because we were trying to keep things tight. So my biggest approach in game design has actually been trying to expand the sandbox and let go of more of the scripting, because of that need to put more trust in other people and to put more trust in the players, and to try to relinquish some of that control and move on from some problems, but then hear the constant feedback of like what people want and what problems are my action items. And you have to be able to sift through those problems. And it's a delicate balance, you know?
Where have you been successful at sifting through those problems? And especially with thinking about Snowblind, like your most recent experience, like where have you been successful at sifting through some of those problems?
Well, so for example, you know, you get feedback sometimes and players will like complain about something and like talk about someone in the feedback that they're complaining about. And it's like, okay, but who is it? And they don't give you a name. You don't know if it's a player or a staff member. You don't know what's going on. Or people like complain about their squad leaders. Squad leaders aren't staff. Like, if your event feedback is that we should fire your squad leader, like, well, we didn't hire them. So.
Yeah, fair enough, right? Yeah.
But so at a certain point, like, those are the things that I can kind of be like, all right, well, I can't act on those problems to a certain extent. Then, okay, whatever. I can dismiss those a bit. But then with like, you know, what the actual problems are, people were saying, hey, like the game felt like it really got stuck in this one area, and the game felt like these and these things happened. Then I can go to my staff, because I give all the staff all the access to all the survey answers. All the survey answers are anonymous, but I do show everyone all the answers. So, you know, we can then sift through that and see, hey, here's what players liked, here's what players didn't like, here's what we need to change. And that's where like the theme for the next game of like focusing a lot more on the patrolling and breaking the units apart, that is where like that's one of our action items from, hey, people wanted more of this.
Right. Where do your games fall between sort of like, let's call it on the Milsim line? Like you talk about, you know, like Milsim West, you've experienced all of these types of events from like the goofy, you know, like, you know, I say goofy, like the Jet games. They're not goofy, but like it's you know, like I've seen there's like battle wizards and stuff. Like
it's goofy.
Yeah, so like from there to the like the hardcore like dismounted light infantry like experience of Milsim West, like where do you find that balance for your player base, and like are you tweaking that more often than not, or are you sort of set in your approach?
So my balance with it is very much, you know, you could, if you read our rule set or if you look at our website, I think the balance with it becomes obvious. Like I like the tactical game aspect of Airsoft. I like doing long movements. I like doing long flanks. I like having the game be continuous. So like, I don't have to go back to the parking lot and wait for everyone to take an extra hour to go back to listen to the next safety brief. So the game can start an hour and a half late. Like I like the immersive aspect of the game being continuous. I like the tactical gameplay that is possible when you collaborate on a large scale. I think the military way of organizing is very efficient for that.
It's almost like it's their job, right?
Yeah, right? Like that's the thing, is like I like learning the lessons from Milsim that help make the games immersive and make the games feel believable. But I like leaving behind some of the baggage of Milsim of like, oh, well, your kit has to be correct. You have to be in the correct era for when this conflict is taking place. You have to be representing real countries. Our story doesn't even involve real countries.
Right.
Like, I like, so that's the thing. From a gameplay perspective, I think we incorporate the fun parts of Milsim. From an aesthetics perspective, I think we mostly lean in like almost a traditional Airsoft way.
Mm-hmm. What are the things that you find like for your players? They're like, we really want this thing. We really care about it. And like, you know, I think about sort of like our games, for example, where we're building this Airsoft like experience over time, and we're just introducing factions. And like last year is the first ever time that players were like faced with camouflage requirements, where it's like you have to wear either green base or like tan. And for them, it was like, oh my God. But then also they're like, okay, no, we kind of dig it now, right? What are some of those for your players that are a bit more maybe Milsim, like that they're like, no, this is good for us. Like we're happy to do this, even if it's a bit more restrictive for what we do.
So one of the big things, like the weapon classes, like a lot of players really dig the weapon classes in our games, because I actually take a lot of inspiration from like Warhammer.
Okay. Yeah.
If you look at the way Warhammer is designed around having customizable, unique models that express, you know, whatever faction or whatever era or whatever else you want to represent. And then there's rules that make those different models make sense. Like a Tyranid model is going to have different rules from a Space Marine model, is going to have different rules from a Tau model. And that makes them all feel distinct. That's kind of how I look at weapon classes in Airsoft. Like, I want the Airsoft guns to feel like how they work at my Airsoft game represents to an extent, you know, like to a scale, kind of how that gun would be used in real life.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that I really focus on. And in general, like players get it and they seem to like it.
So, like, when you talk about weapon classes, it's like, okay, well, squad support weapons. So they're the only ones who fire full auto and they got a box mag. That type of situation?
Yeah, so we have like, well, that's the thing. We have a lot of weapons classes.
Okay.
We have riflemen, and they're the only guys allowed to use grenade launchers. So like riflemen are powerful as a result. Like you can't have an LMG and a grenade launcher. You got to choose. Then you've got your CQB specialist that they shoot one jewel, but they can go full auto. But they can't use drum mags because then you've got the LMG, which is the belt fed, and they can use full auto. And then they've got standard rifleman energy limits. But then you've got the MMG, which is like your 240, your PKM, your heavy, like full-size M60, where in real life, those shoot a heavier cartridge. They have a longer barrel. So in our games, they get a higher velocity limit. Then you've got the DMR, and they get .4s issued while everyone else gets 2.8s. And as a result, the DMR has a real range and accuracy advantage because it's got a higher velocity and a match grade ammo. So now the DMR feels like it actually makes sense rather than just being outclassed by machine guns.
And you issue ammo too?
Yep. Yeah, we issue ammo. And that's one of the more divisive things for some players because everyone's got their favorite BB weight, right? Like people are like, why don't you issue me 3 6s? I'm like, I don't know, because it would take a $125 ticket to a $200.
Yeah, really, right? Yeah. So with respect to this ammo, like that's a similar thing to what Milsim West does, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, and that's the thing is like Milsim West also issues ammo, and they're like obviously the easiest point of comparison, but ammo issuance is a little bit more common here in the United States in some games. Like a lot of role-playing games control ammo very tightly. Actually, where I really saw the effectiveness of in-game ammo as a mechanic was at both Milsim West and Survive Omega back when they were running games here. They're a post-apocalyptic game, so one of their mechanics was that you didn't know what weight ammo you were getting. Like you're just finding ammo in the field, and it might just be color-coded, and you might be able to figure out like what ammo is what through the game, or there might be unlabeled baggies that are mixed weight.
That's crazy.
So, yeah. So so that was but that to me really revealed like the intentionality behind the choice of how you issue ammo. Like you can take that and turn it into a full-fledged game mechanic where rather than it just feeling like, oh, my airsoft gun has ammo through the chain of command because this is a milsim. Now it's also, well, my airsoft gun is a gun that I don't have ammo for because I live in the post-apocalypse, and whatever ammo I scrounge up may be of varied reliability if I don't know where it came from.
That's a very interesting concept. And I guess it would only it makes sense in the context of certain themes, right? Like if you're doing like snowblind, you're probably not going to take that route, right? Like it's going to be based on the experience.
I'm not giving someone a bag of 12s. Like.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Or a mixed bag, being like figure it out.
Yeah.
In terms of like your rule set and stuff like that, like we talked about how you're taking feedback and you're applying and you're modifying. How has your rule set evolved like over the last couple of years, and sort of what are you looking at now in terms of sort of the next steps for what's going to change?
I would say our rule set in general has remained largely similar. Like a lot of stuff has kind of not changed that much. Like if I look at version 1 and I think we're on 2.2 now of the rule set, the second edition change was big. Like that was where we added a bunch of new weapons classes. We added vehicle rules. We added like a whole bunch of different stuff. But now, like most of my rule set, I think in general, the way the rule set runs is very good. People have like tweaks they want. People have things, like we get onesie twosies of different feedback. Of course, everyone's got ideas, right? And some ideas are really, really good. Some ideas are like, I'm glad that sounds cool to you, but it doesn't make sense for us. Like it's not a big deal. Like talking is part of the fun of this. But I think my biggest action items for the rule set for next year, as of right now, are mainly just simplifying like the verbiage of some things, trying to make it a little less bloated if possible, because rule set creep is very real. You want to enable so many things. You want to create a very intentional gameplay experience. But as a result, then sometimes it gets a little bit long. So now I'm looking at like, okay, well, how can I condense it and make it a little bit more like skimmable?
Mm-hmm.
That I think is the biggest thing. But other than that, like in terms of like the way the classes balance out, the way ammo rolls, if I was looking at anything, as our budget expands, I might look into like not allowing, like issuing heavier BBs. Because if everyone could have heavier BBs, then like I'm sure everyone would be happy about that.
Yeah.
But that just means that like our budget needs to expand. We need to be doing all these different things. It just needs to make sense. But that's gonna be like as we continue to run through the year, because we're only one event deep into 2025 right now.
Yeah.
We got 3 more coming up. So of course, for right now, I'm like, I just ran the first game on like our latest version of the rule set. And in general, the feedback was really good, so I feel great about it.
and I want to talk about those games now in a second, but the upcoming events and stuff. But I'm curious though. Again, coming back to the rule set for a second, one question that was asked to me recently by one of the guys on the podcast, Pick. He was asking about drones, and I'm just curious about how you deal with like emerging technologies. And one of the things that we're dealing with now is this. Working with Flamingo, we have access now finally to a lot more launchable grenades. Like in the States, you guys have had tag-ins forever. For us, that's not a thing. It's been firstly extremely cost prohibitive, and most of them have been not allowed. Now we get these launchable grenades that can fire a 209 primer and like explode and do all this kind of stuff. And so we are being forced with questions with like, okay, well, can I show up to like one of your games and like smoke some kid with a 209 primer like shell? Like, how is that going to work? And I think the reason I ask this question is because I think the gut reaction is often to prohibit and say, no, you can't use it until we figure out how this is going to work. But in a weird way, you're not going to do that until people start using it and show you how they intend to use this tech. So I'm just curious, like, how have you looked at some of this stuff? And
I think the biggest thing is trying to keep, if you're building a rule set or you're creating a game, you need to have like kind of the ear to the ground of what people are looking to do in your game and what questions people are asking. So a lot of community engagement really helps to keep your knowledge up, on what's coming. And when you know what's coming, you can start to anticipate it. And when you kind of try to do the research and try to learn about those things, then you can kind of see, okay, here's the strengths, here's the weaknesses, here's how it might clash with our intention as game designers, here's how it might mesh with our intention as game designers. So, for example, we do have a drone class. We do allow players to bring out drones, but the way we run it is, okay, if you're going to bring out a drone, it's not just so you can be the main character, like flying a drone around and annoying everybody. It's so that you're going to embed within your platoon's HQ element, and you're going to provide intelligence to the rest of the players with you. And then that drone is not a shootable asset, but you also can't shoot anything with it. Like, we don't allow drop grenades. We don't allow the drone to shoot anything, because our idea is that, like, notionally, this is an intel guy who's got access to some technology where he can be an eye in the sky. But then there's the weakness of like, and everyone thinks that, oh, well, if I can't shoot down the drone, it's so cheesy. But until drones get to a disposable level of cheap, nobody wants to bring a drone that's going to be shot now.
Yeah, like legitimate though, right? Like, yeah.
And even then, like, what is the implication of leaving shot down drones all over the place? You're going to leave lithium batteries out in the field if people don't recover it?
Yeah, I'm sure the insurance would love that. That would go over super well.
Yeah, so that's the thing is I for right now I like the balance of drones not being a weapon. Drones are an intelligence gathering tool, and generally speaking, when drones are limited in the capacity of like, hey, you have to actually want to use the drone for its intended purpose. We have, with a 3 platoon game, we have a maximum of 3 drones per side, and each side is allowed to bring drones. So it feels fair. It doesn't feel overpowered. It doesn't feel like BS that some squad just happens to have a guy who has a drone, so they have this unfair advantage. It feels like part of the gameplay of, well, yeah, we have drones that we can use.
Yeah.
But then you also do have to be careful with it, because let's say you're trying to hide your patrol base from another group of players and your drone goes right back to your patrol base and lands. people saw that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. At one of our events 2 years ago, maybe last year, we had one of our videographers flying his drone, and
Mhm.
some players were trying to be sneaky, right? They go on like a long sort of like recce patrol and sort of like avoid detection and stuff. And he was flying his drone and he could see them. And other players could also see the drone and be like, well, if
Mhm.
that drone's flying there, they're probably looking at something. So let's go check out what's going on over there. Right. So, to
Yep.
your point, it's like you see the drone land, you're like, oh, I wonder where he just went. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a fair answer. And like there's so much new technology that's coming out all the time. The drones are one thing, like they're getting
Yep.
smaller and cheaper. Like I can certainly imagine certainly not on an airsoft budget, but where drones get to the point where they're like super disposable, right? Like people, are swapping them all the time. And like there's gonna be other techs as well. And I really take your point of we need to figure out, or we need to make sure that we understand like what is it that you want to do, and then figure out whether
Mhm.
or not you can make that happen, or to your point, how can you make it happen within the context of what you're trying to provide as an experience, right? And make sure
Yep.
that I think it's really clever what you're saying. It's like, yeah, you embed it, make sure all teams get access to it, and then people who show up, kind of like vehicles in a way too. Like if you're crazy
Yeah.
enough to have a player-owned vehicle that you want to bring to an event, it makes sense to
Yep.
have like certain rules that allow you to do that, to operate it, especially for vehicles safely, right? And
Yep.
and all this kind of stuff.
Well, and that's one of the big things I think people underestimate about airsoft, because we were talking, I think it was before the podcast, about like the different ways people look at airsoft. People want different things out of airsoft, and there's different types of airsoft players.
Mhm.
But I find that like for my style of game, my game is like it almost borders on LARPy, where it's like, yeah, you accept all these rules to try to craft this experience, and you kind of like play within the spirit of that. Like that is very much like a Dungeons and Dragons and LARP understanding of like the intention of a rule set.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily a competitive sport rule set. So my players, I will have some of them where like we have vehicle rules, to your point, using that as an example. One of my guys is like, hey, so for our rules for the vehicles, you have to leave your windows down so you can shoot the drivers, and the drivers can be shot all the time. And then any frag grenade, any chalk grenade, anything kills the vehicle. Like unarmored vehicles provide no explosive protection. My first draft of the rule set, before I even published it ever, had that vehicles would be killed if you shot the windshield. But then that became like an enforcement thing, and like, well, does that count? Like, would a shot to the windshield hit the driver? Or would it glance off? So we're just like, all right, well, you're all the windows that can be lowered have to be lowered. But we had one of our guys who regularly brings vehicles to our game say, well, I don't know, it kind of feels like, a shot to the engine block would disable my vehicle. So can I mount a clay pigeon as a hood ornament? And if they shoot that out, my vehicle's disabled? I'm like, the fact you're thinking like this tells me that yes, A, you can do that, and B, like, way to understand the assignment. Like, if you want to do shit like that, that is totally allowed.
Yeah. And, and that comes back to what we were talking about, previously too, like what is the player trying to get out of this experience, right? And, I can totally imagine a scenario where like the player own vehicle gets shot out and he's like, that was so cool, even though technically like that's a loss for the team, but that experience is a net positive, right? Overall.
Well, because then it enables the mechanic of shit, I got to repair my vehicle. And that becomes part of gameplay. Like this guy wants to play the experience of using a technical in a hostile environment, and he wants to simulate those things. Like, yeah, I'm not going to stop him. If he wants to introduce these interesting mechanics that make more gameplay for him and everyone around him, like that is my dream as a game designer, is for players to look at things like that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So looking at so we talked a little bit about your sort of like your Vietnam patrol based sort of like setup coming up. What else are you cooking up for the rest of the year?
So we've got 3 more games this year. We've got Deadfall, which is in a few weeks, April 26, 2025. That's at the Landing, which is in Penn Run, Pennsylvania. And that one's my attempt to have, a lot of patrolling, forces more spread out, like different areas of key terrain to hold with different consequences for each. That's kind of my focus on that, because it's a very densely wooded, really uneven, really hilly facility. And I think that plays really well, because you can have a lot of room to maneuver, and people might not be able to see you until you're within like 200 feet of them. And it's a 200 plus acre facility.
Wow.
So
huge space.
So that's the thing is, you got that much space with that dense of vegetation and tree cover, and now you have so much room to move. So that one I'm really excited about. That's our next 12 hour. Then we just announced on July 19th and 20th at Zulu 24. I'm wearing this hoodie for several reasons, but at Zulu 24, we're doing the Nath Underworld, and that's our next role-playing game. And my goal for that one is last year we had our first role-playing game, which was the Skjult Underworld, and that game went really well for a first run. But in some moments, it felt like there was like one kind of narrative hook for a lot of players, and then like there wasn't as much density of like other choices. And generally speaking, like the feedback from that game was really good. A lot of really actionable stuff as well, like which we've taken into the rule set of like defining the difference between in-game laws and the actual like administrative game rules. And my priority for the Nath Underworld is going to be density of choices. I want it to feel like a Fallout game.
Okay. And so how do you go about that in your game design? So obviously like your D&D experience as a GM and all that definitely plays a part, but how do you incorporate that sort of like decision tree sort of event generation as well as incorporating the airsoft stuff simultaneously?
Well, so that's the thing is you almost have to look at it as not designing an airsoft game. You have to think about like, for example, have you played Fallout New Vegas?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I feel like it's gonna be the easiest point of reference for a lot of people.
Sure.
The reason Fallout New Vegas feels so different from Fallout 4 is because you have a density of narratively consequential choices constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even necessarily always within the main quest. A lot of it is within the side quests and the way factions respond to you and the consequences for your actions. So my priority for trying to put that into an airsoft game is, like we talked about, being able to trust other people, right? That's one of my big things as a game designer now is I have to be able to rope other people in. And I'm making all of my staff give me at least 3 unique quest ideas. Like things that players can do for them that they will have like consequences and actions for. And that's going to be one of my main things for like, as we get staff for this game is, hey, bring in like unique quests. I'm putting out to players like, hey, build a character, have a thing that your character wants to do, run a business, have goals for your business. We're actually going to, I don't want to totally spoil a mechanic, but I might. Fuck it. I can say a little bit about it. But one of our ideas for how to do this is that if players show up with no like prep of anything, like they have no idea what their business is, they don't know what they're doing. If anyone shows up and they have like no concept, we're going to give them a prompt, like a paragraph that is like, here's where your player came from. Here's loosely their history. Here's an immediate goal to work toward.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to build in some other stuff at the beginning of the game. We're like, hey, to get an unemployment stimulus check, you have to prove that you're going to look for a job and get stamps from the different businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to force the players to go out and interact with people. And as they interact with people, they'll find the different hooks. They'll find things to interact with, and they'll have choices to make. And I think encouraging that movement, encouraging like that thought about like, who am I? What do I want to do? Rather than just like treating it like a total sandbox, I think that's going to make people engage with the narrative a little bit more, and that's going to make people feel more involved.
Do you have people who show up at these events who are like fish out of water? They're like, I have no idea what I signed up for. Or again, like coming back to your community, like most people who show up, they know what they're getting into.
It's a mix always. I've had both people who showed up as airsofters not knowing what to expect from a more roleplay focused game. And I've had people show up as larpers who didn't know what to expect from an airsoft game.
Oh, interesting.
So we've got a few members of our community now who never played airsoft until they came out to my games because they were always larpers.
Oh, cool.
So that's the thing, is we always think about like how hard is it for an airsofter to wrap their head around role play versus how hard is it for a role player to wrap their head around airsoft.
Mm-hmm.
And in a weird way, I think as long as you try to think about meeting those people where they're at, and I never like having a conversation with people where I yell at them. I never like, I've done that. Like, I think we've all gone through that phase with airsoft, right? We're like,
Yeah.
You yell at people and you get frustrated about stuff and you get angry and you get emotional and it causes problems. But like long term, that never proves to be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
But having that ability to meet people where they're at and design things in a way to excite them to progress to where they need to be for your game. That's my main priority as much as I can make.
Yeah. So this LARP game, you're building out that quest tree, like building it out, really, like increasing.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of quests are you talking about? Like, is this like small stuff, big stuff, without spoiling too much? Like, what are you getting players? Like you mentioned, like getting stamps and stuff, but like, what are some of the things that are more like airsoft related, perhaps, that players are having to do?
So one of the easiest things is like crime. If you want to role play as a criminal, which is like everybody who comes, let's be honest, everyone who comes to one of these games to role play as a civilian, to some extent, they want to get into some criminal activity, right? Like, that's part of the fun. But, we add that system of, hey, as a civilian, these are the airsoft guns you can bring. And that now gives you an excuse to, like, if you've got a Flux Raider kit or, some of those like weirder concealable airsoft guns, open carry is illegal and is considered a threat. And the police have all the ammo and they're going to kill the shit out of you if they see you just waving a piece around. So now you have a reason almost. And I think some people get excited about this part, which is why I mentioned it, where now you have a reason for like that stupid concealable gun, like my USW kit.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think excites people, is like now you've got like that aspect of the gameplay where like concealability matters. But then things with like the actual airsoft guns, ammo is an in-game mechanic, as it is for all of our games. But for this one, it's like an expensive resource. So you need to be able to like either fight other players and steal their ammo, or complete quests to earn money to buy ammo, or get in good with a faction and then organize with those people to go do like fights and whatnot, and they'll give you the ammo. So it kind of incentivizes through the airsoft the various forms of interaction with the world. And I think that that's the balance that you need to hit as a designer. Like, and it's hard. We actually had a lot of the airsofters even last year be like, hey, I felt like ammo was too easy to come by.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And you would think that that's one of the things where airsofters would be like, oh, wow, it was $200 in-game dollars for 10 BBs. Ammo is way too limited. No, they wanted it harder.
Wow. Well, I mean, again, and I think that's a really good example of what you're talking about before. Like, they're playing the game the way that you intended it. Like, you're really well aligned when it comes to sort of delivering on what they want and them understanding what you're trying to deliver clearly. If they're like, no, this was too easy, right?
Yeah, I like to think so. I think sometimes like I almost try to oversolve problems. So like when I see a problem, like, oh, I don't think people have enough ammo, I'll be like, okay, what's the upper limit of what I can do within the parameters of our design? And then I'll realize that even the upper limit was like more than people wanted. So that's been another part where like you have to let go of problems sometimes. And it's always a balancing act. I like to think in general I nail it pretty well, but it's like anything, there's always going to be things to refine and improve on. And I try to take the feedback very honestly of doing that.
So this year, guys, you get ready. You're getting 5 BBs and a rubber band. Like, that's it.
At least for one purpose.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that's Nath Underground. So that's event number, I guess, 3. So
that's event number 3 for this year. And then event number 4 is going to be in the fall. We've got a 24-hour game.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna run back our 24-hour game in the fall this year, and people like the 24-hour. I think the 24-hour last year was in general like our 100% best received event.
What about the 24 hours is like, are you doing like morning to morning, evening to evening? Like, how do you organize it and why is it so appealing to your player base?
So we do morning, not morning to morning, afternoon to afternoonish.
Hmm.
Like we started, I think at noon, and we ended around 10:30 or 11 on the Sunday. So I think people like the 24-hour game because that helps really pace things out, and it helps. Obviously there's an amount of gunfighting people want to do, but what I found is that as the game went on, people wanted to do less and less gunfighting until the final battle where they had been kind of saving their energy and they wanted to go all out. But I think it lets people pace themselves out. It lets everyone go home like having played as much airsoft as they wanted.
Hmm.
Like there is no version of that game where you didn't play as much airsoft as you could handle, basically.
Yeah, certainly. And like, is that event like a like beginner friendly 24-hour event? Would you say? Like, how would you rate it?
that
Yeah.
that's one of our goals. Last year we did have the factions infill because you infill with a ruck at that point,
Hmm.
right? Like, we did use the vehicles that each side had to an extent to help with logistics. So we try to meet people where they're at in that way. And we're not making people do a 6 mile infill ruck,
Yeah.
but literally I'm anticipating 6 to 10 miles of movement before I even get to bed down at the Milsim West game this coming weekend.
Hmm.
Like that is the hardcore game. That's a game I like to play. I think it's really, really cool, but it's not like a level of game that everyone is prepared for.
Yeah.
So I try to meet people at the level where you're trying to prepare to maybe go to something like that, or where you are seeing if that might be something you're interested in. So you will do an infill where like people went up a hill and it was a big hill, but at the same time, it's like a mile.
Hmm.
So you're going to walk a mile up a hill and you might have your ruck carried by a vehicle if like you can wrangle the assistance or if your faction has enough vehicles. So it'll be more accessible, but it's not like, you're not riding in a vehicle out. Like
Gotcha.
there is a certain level of fitness and like capability that will be tested. But at that point, I want to say this very delicately because I don't believe in body shaming people, like, period. I don't believe it.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It is not about what you look like. It is about what you think you can do.
Yeah.
Like, I've got some guys on my staff who are not like shredded dudes. They're bigger. They don't exercise as much. They like beer. They like pizza and ice cream. And they make it through like Milsim West regularly.
Yeah.
And so, part of it is physical, like, whether or not you're carrying like extra weight or you do running ever or whatever, that is going to have an effect. But to a very large extent, a lot of it is how well did you prepare? How well do you know how to manage yourself? And how mentally tough are you?
Definitely.
And I think exciting people about the format and about the game helps them to test those things.
Yeah, I think there's a huge thing, and one of the events that we're running this year is just like an endurance race, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
getting players to be like, for a lot of humans, like you've never really pushed yourself past a
Mm-hmm.
certain limit, and there's absolutely, and I totally agree with you. Like, body shaming is no place, and like, anybody who's out there really trying to get to get that experience of like, okay, how hard can I push myself? That's amazing, right? That's awesome.
Yeah.
And if it requires an airsoft game to get you to experience that, then so much the better, right? Like, that's great.
Yep.
But there also is, it is still a limitation. And one of the things, we were talking about as we were considering doing this serious milsim that you and I were talking
Mm-hmm.
about before the show. Like, when I announced that to the guys here in town, it's like, it's a 12-hour game. They're like, oh, but that's not a serious milsim if you can't, it's not 24 hours. And I'm like, yeah, but you guys can't even go for 4 hours right now. So like, we have to go in stages, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you can play, if you, after a 4-hour game, you're completely bushed and you can't keep pushing for the last 2 hours, that's fine. Like, no shame. But me tacking on an extra 20 hours is not setting you up for even the possibility of being successful, right? So, I mean, I take your point. Like, it's great to have these type of, like, for lack of a better term, intermediate events where you can see, like, do I really want to do this? Do I even enjoy this? before
Yep.
you fully commit to something like Milsim West, which is going to be, to your point, like if it's a 6 mile ruck in, like that's tough for anybody, unless that's your bag, in which case, fine, weirdo. For most people, it's going to be tough, right? Like,
you don't need to call me out like
yeah.
that.
Well, listen, you're talking to the guy who runs ultras, so like,
Yeah,
fair,
okay,
right?
yeah. We're both crazy. I get it.
But yeah, like it's probably a hard time to find out that you don't like 6 kilometers, 6 mile ruck marches when you've just signed up to do one. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And it is that like people finding out how they can push themselves through something they're excited about. Like I'll be the first person to say I used to be 350 pounds. I used to be like this super like sedentary, morbidly obese dude. I always like lifting, but I didn't like running. I didn't like cardio. I didn't like hiking. I didn't like doing any of the stuff I do now. And Airsoft was part of what got me excited to do that stuff. Like I realized that if I wanted to be better at at this thing I really cared about, I wanted to do all these other things. And that made me realize I really liked those things too. So it is about meeting people where they're at. And like, just because you're not somewhere now that you want to be, set realistic goals, find those increments, find those intermediaries, hit those, and then go for the next thing.
Totally.
And that's okay.
Totally. So with respect to this event, what's your main goal as the event runner for this one? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What's your goalpost?
So for the 24-hour game, I think my goalpost for this one is trying to hit a level of scale that we haven't hit before. And that's going to come down to ultimately the size of the facility. We're running this one at a facility that's like over 1,000 acres.
Wow.
And it's uneven, it's big, and I think that's going to be really, really cool. I think it's going to be really fun. But I think that's going to be a different level of game where now, logistical vehicles are going to matter even more, or maybe having vehicles that can transport people around is going to matter even more. Making intelligent movements is going to matter. Really using the drone class is going to matter. So that's going to be my theme for the 24-hour game. I think is going to be a focus on scale and trying to really push like how big can one of our games get and how much can we utilize of the space in a way that feels like it makes sense. That going into, we're still in the design phase at this point. Like before we announce games formally, I usually try to have everything done, like artwork, game design doc, website page, all that. So we're still in kind of the workup phase to like finishing that design doc, but my priority for it personally is trying to push the scale.
So this is going to be the Gun Gamers like D&D epic, right? Like this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, this is gonna be the Gun Gamers Super Bowl.
Yeah,
that's what I want this one to be. I want it to be the 2025, Gun Gamers, like the BBEG fight. And to be honest, if the rest of the year goes in like a really interesting way narratively, I threatened like back when the game started that if one side like does too poorly for too long or like loses too majorly in too many ways, that maybe I'll write a faction out of the game. And then in the next year, it'll be a different faction.
Nice.
I don't know if this will be the year where that happens, but I've got my eye on it. 'Cause I figure if we run, because this is our third. No, this is, let's see, 2022, we ran our first game. 2023, we ran 3 games. 2024, we ran 4 games. This year will be this is our 4th year. If after year 5, we've got like a trend emerging and there's like enough things that have happened, then year 6, I might look into starting to like rewrite some of the factions, because I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I definitely, and especially where you were saying earlier that your players are leaning into the factions, right? More than you expected them to. I can imagine some people like being like really mourning their faction loss and like trying to figure out what they're going to do. Like I think you probably will be surprised by the reaction if and when that indeed does happen, right?
Oh yeah. Because when I wrote the factions initially, it was kind of just, it was enough of a prompt for it to make sense that there were different uniform rules and to like have people have an idea of what the cohesive identity was.
Mm-hmm.
And I never expected people to really care, to be honest.
Yeah,
Like
legit.
I've written lore for games for 10 years, and more than half the time players never give a shit. They just always they're just there for the gameplay. But in a weird way, I think that because the uniform rules were so, I say loosey-goosey, but it's green versus tan, right? Like predominantly green versus predominantly tan, which is very strict by some people's standards, but by the standards of like larpers and milsimmers, that's really, really liberal.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have like super liberal uniform rules, but then there's this lore to it, people started treating it like Warhammer armies, and they've all got costumes of like all the different units that they want to play as. Like I've got guys who show up to different games and they never play as the same unit twice, and they know the whole unit tax op, the whole lore background. They've got the patches for like all their different LARP units. It's awesome, but it's like not something I expected.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's, man, like, yeah, that's the beauty of it too. And I mean, same thing here. Like we've developed factions and all this kind of stuff, and some players don't care, and that's fine. They're like, oh, I'm playing green. I'm like, well, your green faction has a name, bud. It's like, yeah, I don't care. And other players, like, they're like, are you going to make patches? Like, are you going to sell them? Like, you know, what about flags and all this kind of stuff? And, you know, suddenly this random faction that you have now has like an identity, right? That players are using to build their kits around. And that's a pretty cool experience for sure.
Yeah, but I think there are still like the players who don't really care. There are always going to be players who don't really care, but as long as you have room for those players, I mean, some of those players will go from not caring to like the next game they show up as like a gung-ho part of a LARP unit. So you never know.
Yeah.
Like the pipeline is always there. But I do think, to your point about the flags, the first thing that I think really made people get into it was when we introduced the faction flags. Because we give you, with your registration, we give you a blue flag for the Almeric Republic, the tan team, or a yellow flag for the Kingdom of Gojiria, the green team. People see these flags, and the flags kind of look cool. I like to think, you know, they look decent. Some of our staff, a couple of our staff members collaborated on designing them. And people see this flag patch that they got free with registration. They're like, oh, what's this? And I think that really piqued the curiosity. But that goes to show, like, you can reinforce certain things with like how you engage with them as well.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, it was so great to catch up with you. I'm very much looking to hearing, and hopefully this time we don't take like a 2-year break between our conversations.
God, right? Let's set a calendar reminder, like at least before the end of this year.
Yeah, definitely, because I'm really curious to hear, and especially like your LARP game. I'm really curious to hear about how that goes. But
I'm so excited.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been a great catching up with you, and I can't wait to hear more about these events.
Hell yeah, man. It's been awesome. It's been awesome coming on. You know, hopefully next time we'll even get to talk about some other people's events, because I love geeking out about my games, but I am still a player, I promise. Yeah. I still play games.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. That's all we've got for you this week, and we will talk to you next week. Take care.